Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. We hear from the president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, who explains why his client is suing the University of Lethbridge. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says it doesn't appear as though Alberta will be moving forward with its own provincial police force. He will explain why. And after 18 years of marriage, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife Sophie have separated.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Frances Widdowson, the speaker who was invited to talk on how wokeism threatens academic freedom at the University of Lethbridge, is now suing the university for cancelling her talk in February of this year. Widdowson was invited by Dr. Paul Viminetz, a U of L professor, to discuss how woke ideology is hostile to free speech. Now, some of the reasons the university says it cancelled her speech was for the safety of the diverse community and harm associated with her talk. Widdowson was a tenured professor at Mount Royal University until she was fired back in 2021. Now, despite the event being cancelled, Widdowson showed up anyway and tried speaking at the U of L atrium. She was shouted down by a large group of protesters. She then moved to an adjacent area and continued to lecture, but again was drowned out by protesters. The talk was eventually moved to an online forum later that evening. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms is handling this case. To chat about why Frances Widdowson is suing the University of Lethbridge is the president of the JCCF, John Carpe, who joins us now from Calgary. John, whatever happened to free speech, especially free speech on campus?
It's been dying a very slow death for the past 20 years. It started out with university authorities and student unions were persecuting pro-life groups and saying pro-life students could not freely express their views on campus. And I warned at the time, this is 15 years ago, if we tolerate the suppression of pro-life speech, it's a cancer that's going to spread. And so today there's all kinds of issues and topics that you cannot talk about on a university campus. So the cancer of censorship has been spreading for the last 15 years.
What kind of compensation is Frances Widdowson looking for in this case?
So in the court action that we filed on behalf of her, as well as University of Lethbridge professor Paul Viminetz and a student as well, we are seeking a declaration that the university has violated their charter rights and freedoms. And we're also seeking a court order to compel the university to host the event. And that was filed in late July. And of course, like all court actions, it will probably take a year or two or longer before we finally get a ruling.
So what can we really do moving forward, John, in regards to protecting free speech on campuses across Canada?
I think it's important for people to contact their provincial politicians, their member of the Legislative Assembly, and express the view that they don't want their tax dollars going to universities that repudiate their very mission, their very reason for being is to facilitate debate and to allow free expression and to facilitate dialogue in the pursuit of truth. That's the very role of the university. When a university repudiates that by caving into mob pressure to cancel a speaker who has some unpopular views, those universities should not be getting money from taxpayers, and taxpayers need to tell the premier and the provincial politicians that universities need to clean up their act. Otherwise, they should not get taxpayer funding.
Thanks so much for your time today, John. That was John Carpe, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining us from Calgary. By the way, Bridge City News also reached out to the University of Lethbridge for comment, but they declined since this matter is now before the courts. It appears as though Alberta may no longer be pursuing a plan to dump the RCMP in favour of a provincial police force. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says Justice Minister Mickey Amory received his mandate letter from Premier Daniel Smith, and there was no mention of it. Amory says the idea of a provincial police force is not dead, but his department will continue to consult with Albertans on which direction they want to go with policing.
The government sunk a lot of political capital into this over the last couple of years. But the mandate letters, as we talked about earlier, they've been sort of coming out over the last few weeks, and the mandate letter to the Justice Minister doesn't mention an Alberta provincial police force. So So the minister has said that, this is a thing that will be studied and recommendations will come back to the cabinet and that sort of stuff. So, it's out there a little bit, but it certainly does not seem like this is a priority for the provincial government at this time.
Tyler Dawson will also discuss how the province is combating the opioid crisis in Alberta as overdose deaths continue to climb. He'll share details coming up in the second half of our program. Well, it was sunny and hot again today in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is here now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, did we get close to maybe breaking a record today?
Well, Hal, we were initially looking at an expected high today of 35 degrees, but that changed to 30 degrees, and the record for today, August 2nd, was actually 36.1, which happened back in 1971. So, no, it was not a record breaker today, not even close. However, it was still warm, sunny, not a lot of wind out there. We had a humidex of 30 and a UV index of 8 degrees, so definitely warm. Staying in the teens as well overnight this evening, 13 for an overnight low, which is still higher than the average low for this time of year. And then once we get into Thursday tomorrow, another high of 30 degrees. So it's going to be a warm one again, and I'll be back later in the show to let you know how our weekend is shaping up.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. These hot summer days can be deadly for our homeless population. That is especially true for those who cannot escape the heat nor have access to water. Fortunately, the City of Lethbridge has recently installed water fountains, and there are various cooling shelters and stations around the city to help those who don't have access to air conditioning. The folks at Streets Alive Mission say they've been on double duty during these hot summer days to check up on those who are most vulnerable on our streets.
We have our outreach team out. They're out 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're doing wellness checks. The big things is hydration. So in general, we're just monitoring the population to look for signs of whether it's heat stroke or sunstroke. So if anybody's interested in getting some water, dropping them off, you can drop it off here at Streets Alive. You can take it to the food bank. You could take it to the shelter because we will definitely go through it. I mean, we on average go through 10 cases of water a day.
Streets Alive Mission is a Christian organization which launched back in 1989. It was started by a saleswoman, a Summer City employee, and a pastor's wife. Workers continue to demolish the Lethbridge Hotel that went up in flames earlier this year. Work began on July 24th, and locals are being reminded to be aware of some of the road and sidewalk closures in the area. On February 24th, just after 2 o'clock in the morning, fire crews were called to the hotel with flames shooting out of the upper levels. After it was extinguished, an investigation revealed that the fire was deliberately set. A 33-year-old man was charged back in late May. The building was then turned back over to the owner, who was responsible for the demolition of the property. Lethbridge police have charged a 70-year-old man with uttering threats following an incident where he barricaded himself in a Southside home on Tuesday. Police say the man was evicted from the property along the 1200 block of 31A Street South. He told his landlord he had a firearm, so police were called in. During their investigation, the LPS said the man had previously threatened to shoot 2 other tenants. Now, members of the tactical team were brought in, and the man was arrested. A BB gun was later found inside of the home. Douglas Dwayne Cordial of Lethbridge is charged with uttering threats. He was released from custody and is scheduled to appear in court on September the 14th. A Calgary-based animal rescue says one of their fosters found a bullet lodged in one of their dogs. The dog's name is Fulio, and he's currently being fostered here in Lethbridge by From the Streets Rescue Foundation. His foster mother, Jennifer, says she immediately took him to the vet when she felt something strange under his skin.
He came when he was full of Dermadex. He had no hair on him, stuff like that. And I was rubbing, I could feel a lump on him, and then felt a little bump. Took him out to the vet and found out he's got a bullet in his shoulder. And the vet said that it's possible that he has more bullets in him. When they go to do surgery, they'll do more x-rays, find more. That it's actually a really common thing for people just to shoot dogs and dump them. Like, as sad as it, it's horrible. But that's something that they see very common with rescues. If they see a dog like Fulio, he's a pit bull, and people see him and think, oh, he's dangerous, so they shoot him if they see him. But he's not. He's like pit bulls. He's the biggest suck ever.
And he's so cute. As soon as Fulio gets a surgery to remove the bullet, he'll be up for adoption. And if you'd like to adopt Fulio, make sure you reach out to the good folks from the Streets Rescue Foundation. The Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge and Southern Alberta Art Gallery have partnered to bring a garden party to Galt Gardens in Lethbridge. For the next few weeks during the lunch hour, residents are invited to bring some lunch and try their hand at some arts and crafts.
The important part of it is to just to celebrate our downtown and to celebrate Galt Gardens. We love the space. It's important to our community, and we've got to use it. And I think this is one of the ways that the arts can contribute to that use, and just creating that vibrancy that the arts are so good at doing. To my left here, we've got some yarn bombing happening, so people are spreading their yarn about and making the place all colorful. And then it's the next 4 Wednesdays that are happening in Galt Gardens.
The garden party wraps up on August the 23rd. You know, if you're looking for something to do this long weekend, why not head out to Riding on Stone Provincial Park? Not only will you see the beautiful sandstones with old ridings and badlands the park is so famous for, but you might also run into a few cowboys. The Riding on Stone Rodeo will take place August 3rd through the 5th. There'll be more than 500 participants competing in close to 20 different competitions.
The rodeo is Saturday night at 7 o'clock. Sunday night at 5 o'clock, and on Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock. This is our 56th rodeo that we're having. We're down by Riding on Stone Provincial Park. It's a real unique setting, very picturesque with the sandstones and the river running through. To get to our grounds, just half a mile before you turn into the park is our sign that says Rodeo Grounds. We have 514 entries. There's saddlebound, bareback, half roping, steer wrestling, team roping, ladies barrel racing. There's lots of events. Also this year we're featuring ladies ranch bronc riding. There'll be food trucks there all weekend, and there's a dance on Saturday night. There's a beer garden all weekend. It's a very unique setting. It's very picturesque.
And for the first time this year, they'll be trying something new called ostrich riding. Sounds like a lot of fun. So many of us love camping and heading out to the backcountry in both Alberta and British Columbia. A number of us also enjoy riding ATVs when we head out fishing or hunting. Gary Clark is with a group called the Quad Squad out of the Crow's Nest Pass. He says his group helps to save taxpayers money as they take care of grooming so many trails to help keep them in pretty good shape.
Saving the money, or saving the government thousands of dollars a year, because we do it from our own fundraising and stuff like that. So, for example, last year we estimated in kind it saved the government about $66,000. So it's considerable, and we love doing it. It's we have a great crew to work with, and everybody has fun. And again, I think that's part of you're talking about the fuel to join the club. That's part of it as well.
Gary Clark will have more on trail stewardship in an interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up after Business News. Alberta Wildfire says there are still 117 active wildfires burning here in the province. So far this year, we've seen 934 wildfires, mostly in the central and northern regions of Alberta. Of the current active wildfires, officials say just 2 are currently burning out of control and 39 are being held. Emergency officials say 73% of the wildfires were started by lightning, 15% were human-caused, which includes heat from an exhaust, and around 12% were suspicious and currently under investigation. Residents closest to some of BC's 350 active wildfires are being warned about the risks of wildfire smoke. Health officials say those with breathing issues, including seniors and children, should get medical help right away if they feel shortness of breath, dizzy, or have chest pain. Smoke from the 30 square kilometer Eagle Bluffs fire near Osoyoos is intense as flames spread north from Washington State and burned within meters of some Osoyoos homes on Sunday. Fortunately, winds pushed the fire away from the South Okanagan town, but poor air quality persists in the region and the fire continues to burn. The Manitoba government is promising what it calls the biggest healthcare capital investment in the province's history. Premier Heather Stephenson says the province will spend $1.5 billion over 6 years on the Health Sciences Centre in Winnipeg. She says the funds will help to replace a 70-year-old building and add a 10-story tower with new patient rooms and health services. The announcement is the latest in a flurry of government promises leading up to the provincial election slated for October the 3rd. Residents in Toronto are now allowed to consume alcohol in some of their parks. The city kicked off a 2-month-long pilot project allowing those over the age of 19 to drink booze at 27 selected parks.
This pilot program starts today based on successful experiences in other Canadian cities and with the guidance of our public health department. We know that, yeah, there might be some confusion. Some people may be listening today to your outlet and say, oh, I can drink in a park now. And so when they're first approached by staff in a non-pilot park, it'll be an education first. Did you know that there's no drinking in this park? And so if a person said, yes, there is, I saw it on television, that's when the education begins.
We will not be asking for ID. We will not be carrying breathalyzers. What we are looking for is people to act responsibly. The importance of this media information today is to educate people across the city of all 1,500 parks, of the 27 where you can do it, and of the 1,473 you cannot.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife Sophie had decided to separate after 18 years of marriage. They announced the decision on Instagram, saying it follows what they describe as many meaningful and difficult conversations. The two met as children and reconnected as adults when they co-hosted a charity gala back in 2003. Trudeau is the second Prime Minister to announce a separation while in office. The first was his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. A new Abacus poll shows some bad news for the Trudeau government. While the recent results show that the Poilievre Conservatives lead the Liberals by 10 points, what's most concerning for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is that there's been a large shift in party support among women and young Canadian voters. The poll was taken July 20th through the 25th, with almost 2,500 respondents from across the country participating. This is the first time since 2015 that the Tories now lead the Liberals in both of those categories. The poll says the Conservative Party now leads in all age groups and has a 4-point lead among women. The rising cost of living was the top concern among voters, coming in at 72%. Healthcare was second, followed by affordable housing. Finding news articles and videos from Bridge City News on Instagram and Facebook will soon become a thing of the past. Meta announced it is officially ending news availability in Canada. The company says it will remove news for all Canadian users due to the Trudeau government's Online News Act, or Bill C-18. It became law earlier this summer. Now, Ottawa says that Meta and Google need to compensate Canadian news outlets, such as BCN, for the content that we provide. So in retaliation, Meta says it will not make our content available to Canadians. Heritage Minister Pascal St-Onge says Google and Facebook earn 80% of all digital advertising revenue in Canada. Meanwhile, hundreds of newsrooms have closed and journalists have been laid off. If you follow Bridge City News online, just a reminder, you can still view our content on our X account, formerly known as Twitter. You can also find us on YouTube for now, Rumble, and of course, our website, which is bridgecitynews.ca. Well, with the Humidex today, it felt a lot hotter than 30 degrees across much of southwestern Alberta, but there's a reprieve from the heat on the way. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. You know, it should be another great night for having a few friends over for a backyard barbecue. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it's a little hot right now, but the temperature may be cooling off a bit later this week.
Yeah, that's true. We still have to get through a few more hot days here, but come this weekend, we're going to be seeing cloudy conditions and also temperatures back more seasonable. So as we're looking at a high of 30 degrees on Thursday, up to 37 for a high. That is very hot on Friday, 24 for both Saturday and Sunday with mainly cloudy conditions, 26 for a high on holiday Monday, and then high of 25 degrees on Tuesday with a mix of sun and clouds. The average high for this time of year, 26, average low 11, 36 was our high temperature. That was a record. It happened back in 2000, and the record low was 5 degrees back in 1939. Sun rose this morning at 6:03, sunset this evening at 9:11. We're looking at just barely over 15 hours of daylight. Okay, going to be fairly sunny on the west coast tomorrow with a bit of wind in the Juan de Fuca Strait. Victoria is looking at a high of 24 degrees. Same thing for Vancouver. Could be about 4 or 5 degrees warmer inland, though, with lots of sunshine. Edmonton seeing clearing conditions, high of 24 and 20 to 40 kilometer per hour winds. Calgary, high of 27, could see some showers and risk of thunderstorms. As we get into the rest of the prairies, Saskatoon actually seeing the same kind of conditions as Calgary. Chance of showers, looking at a risk of thunderstorm. Much warmer weather, though. 32 for a high there, 33 for a high Regina, but windy, 30 to 50 K winds, mix of sun and cloud. High of 29 degrees in Winnipeg and mainly sunny skies. As we get to central Canada, we're seeing more precipitation. 28 for a high in Toronto, could see a chance of showers with a risk of thunderstorm. 5 millimeters of rain expected both in Ottawa and Montreal tomorrow with that risk of thunderstorm as well. High 25 in Ottawa, 22 for a high in Montreal. As we get into the Maritimes, we're seeing mainly sunny conditions. All these cities seeing lots of sun, and foggy conditions in the morning, but those fog patches are going to dissipate before noon in all of these cities. So 24 for a high in Fredericton, 26 is looking at the high for Halifax. Charlottetown seeing a high tomorrow of 24 and 22 for St. John's. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The federal government says there are more than 6.6 million unsafe vehicles on Canadian roads. Transport Canada's June analysis estimates that 20% of the 33.3 million vehicles registered in the country as of 2019 have outstanding recalls. The data suggests that some of the safety issues can lead to property damage, injury, or even death. Transport Canada is proposing new rules that would require companies issuing a safety recall to quickly post related information in order to boost awareness and to fix the defect. It also wants auto manufacturers to provide a lookup tool for vehicle inspection numbers to provide recall information. Longshore union negotiators will brief workers on the new tentative collective agreement with employers. The International Longshore and Warehouse Union Canada says a stop work meeting will take place at the union's Vancouver headquarters, and all members will be encouraged to attend. It comes ahead of a 2-day vote on whether to approve the deal that could finally bring an end to BC's long-running port dispute. The vote will take place on Thursday and Friday. The group's leadership caucus is recommending the deal to its full membership. A previous tentative deal was rejected by the port union's members last week. Home sales in Vancouver have skyrocketed nearly 30% last month compared with July of 2022. The Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver says sales totaled 2,455 last month. That is up 28.9% from a year ago. The board also says sales were 15.6% below the 10-year seasonal average. Economists say this bump in sales corresponds with the shock felt last year in response to the Bank of Canada's steep rate hikes. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 314 points on the day to finish at 20,218. The Dow was down 348 points to 35,282. The S&P 500 was down 63 on the day to 4513, and the Nasdaq was down 310 points to 13,973. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.64 to $79.73 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 7 cents to $2.49 US. Gold was down $9.54 on the day to $19.3460 US an ounce, and silver was down 59 cents to $23.71 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.15 per bushel, barley's at $9.01, canola's at $17.63, and corn is at $10.05 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.48 to $178.03. Feeder cattle were down $1.65 to $246.83, and lean hogs were down $1 to $102.68. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $74.90 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Wildfire says there are still 117 active wildfires burning in the province. So far this year, we've seen 934 wildfires, mostly in the central and northern regions of Alberta. Of the current active wildfires, officials say just 2 are out of control and 39 are currently being held. The Alberta government has a plan to address the opioid crisis and to help prevent more overdose deaths. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us in just a moment. If you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, visit lethseniors.com/volunteer drivers. Lethbridge Legal Guidance is a nonprofit society offering free legal advice to low-income Southern Albertans. It holds clinics on Tuesdays from 4 to 6 p.m. by appointment only. Some of the areas the society assists in include family, criminal, traffic, immigration, EI, and other issues. For more information, call 403-380-6338 or visit their website, lethbridgelegalguidance.ca. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Alberta Premier Daniel Smith has been dishing out a number of mandate letters to her ministers. Of note is the letter that was sent to Dan Williams, the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us from our provincial capital. Tyler, the province really needs to get a handle on the drug crisis here in Alberta, as overdose deaths have been climbing once again. Do you think this letter to Minister Williams really specifies that?
Well, the letter, I think, largely looks at a sort of steady as she goes approach. The United Conservative Party has been very keen on what it's calling a recovery-oriented approach to the drug crisis. So instead of focusing on things like harm reduction, supervised injection sites, safer supply of narcotics, they're really focusing on trying to get people into treatment. And so you've seen a lot of that in the way they've talked about the drug crisis in the last few years. They've talked about putting a lot of money into treatment centers. They floated the idea of involuntary treatment for folks who are suffering from drug addiction. So there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of indication that they are, going to aggressively, change their strategy on this. There was a period of time there when it looked like this recovery model was actually working quite well. Drug deaths and overdoses were down across the province. But this sort of also coincided with the pandemic. This also coincided with sort of a nationwide drop in overdose deaths. And they've sort of since started to climb back up to the point where April 2023 was the worst month on record. So, I think probably what we're going to see on that file more than anything is a sense of acceleration on some of this stuff. There's a whole pile of community treatment centers and things like that have been announced. And so I think probably we're going to see a big push here on construction and staffing and some of those things. But my read on the situation is that there isn't, an aggressive change in the government's strategy. But I think there is certainly an acknowledgement within the government that the numbers are not now trending the way the government had thought and would have hoped.
And you know what? It's not just an Alberta problem. We're seeing this in other provinces as well, including British Columbia, which is setting record overdose deaths right now. It's just really sad what's transpiring. Tyler, we saw a rare display of unity involving the mayors of Calgary, Edmonton, and Seniors, Community and Social Services Minister Jason Nixon, who wrote a letter to Federal Housing Minister Sean Fraser. Now, the topic of discussion, the lack of affordable housing here in our province.
That's right. And so there's this fund called the Rapid Housing Fund that is supposed to offer out money to, get affordable housing built quickly. And there's been, I think, 3 rounds of funding dished out from the feds to around the country. And Alberta, didn't get very much this time around. I think 39 projects had applied for that funding and 6 of them got funding. So, that was, and, if you look at the entire sum of money that the federal government dished out, I think Alberta got about 2.5% of that money, and we're about 12% of the country's population. So, this letter is sort of raising that with the federal government, saying, hey, look, why is this not, a proportional distribution of money? There's maybe the sense politically that it's going to more liberal-friendly areas. But, it's a bit of a complicated one, right? Because Alberta's housing, while it's expensive and while there's a lack of affordable housing, is still a heck of a lot cheaper than it is in Toronto or Victoria or Vancouver. So, maybe that's a little bit of the logic that the federal government's going with here. But at any rate, Nixon, Jyoti Gondek, and Amarjeet Sohi all sort of on the same page on this one. Perhaps this will usher in a golden age of municipal-provincial relations, but I somehow doubt that.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau shuffled his cabinet recently, Tyler. Now, what was really interesting is that only one Alberta minister is in cabinet, and that's Randy Boissonnault from Edmonton. The other Liberal MP from Alberta, George Chahal, was shut out. How do you think this will really impact Alberta's relationship with Ottawa moving forward?
Well, it's hard to say, I mean, first of all, there's only 2 Liberal MPs in the province, so not a whole lot of selection for Trudeau to choose from here. So would another minister from Calgary, say, have, improved relations between Alberta and the government in Ottawa? Pretty hard to say, probably unlikely. But, maybe the relevant thing is that Calgary doesn't have a representative in cabinet. Alberta perhaps does by way of Randy Boissonnault, but Calgary certainly doesn't. So, I think there's an attitude in some circles that this was a bit of a snub that Alberta's not getting sort of due representation in cabinet. But, I don't know if the Liberals care all that much. They don't need votes in Alberta to win the next election, really. This is not, I think, the place where a lot of the energy is going to be focused in the next year and a half or whenever the next election comes, because, we don't vote Liberal. So it's a bit of a cat and a mouse thing, which comes first. But nonetheless, there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened in that cabinet shuffle, or didn't happen, is maybe more to the point, that does, I think, affect Alberta's relationship with the Liberal government. And in particular, that's that Stephen Guilbeault stays on as Minister of the Environment and Jonathan Wilkinson stays on as Minister of Natural Resources. And obviously, energy and the environment are sort of the two big files that Alberta's, at loggerheads with the federal government. And so this, I think, probably signals that the federal government is not really planning on changing its tack on the energy file or the environment file. And so, there's the benefit of the fact that there's relationships that have been built and maintained between our provincial government and Guilbeault and Wilkinson. But, if anyone was hoping for a new minister in charge of the environment that was going to, be far more amenable to negotiating with the provinces, I don't think that's the way the Liberals are signaling that they're going.
What's the latest with the relationship between Alberta and Ottawa when it comes to the just transition phase? How Stephen Guilbeault, Justin Trudeau says we want to phase a lot of people out of the energy sector, oil and gas, into more environmentally friendly or more green technology, where Daniel Smith has really pushed back. What's the latest with that?
Well, the interesting development here is that Randy Boissonnault actually got a promotion within cabinet. He moved from the tourism ministry to employment, workforce development, and official languages. Bit of a grab bag of ministries for Boissonnault there. But workforce development, I suspect, is going to have a role in this just transition plan, which they've rebranded it as the Sustainable Jobs Plan. So it's going to be interesting to see what role Boissonnault plays in that. Will it be more palatable to have an Albertan talking about those things to Albertans? It might help a little bit. Perhaps better than Stephen Guilbeault coming from Montreal to talk about it. But, I don't think there has been a whole pile of, let's say, softening on either side on that file. I think that there's probably a little bit of room for negotiation on some of the other contentious parts of the relationship. The net zero electricity grid, for example, the emissions cap from oil and gas companies. Maybe those things are sort of negotiable at some point. But in terms of workforce development, I don't get the sense that the Liberals are all that open to changing it. And the other sort of thing about that, I know I'm rambling on about it, but it is important, is their strategy seems to be in some ways to go directly to workers, to have worker sort of councils and things like that to discuss this. So to some extent, a cynic maybe could argue that they were trying to sort of sidestep the provincial government and take that right to the folks that'll be affected.
Tyler, the plan for Alberta to replace the RCMP with its own provincial police force appears to be dead. Can you explain why?
Yeah, it's a very weird one because the government sunk a lot of political capital into this over the last couple of years. But the mandate letters, as we talked about earlier, they've been sort of coming out over the last few weeks, and the mandate letter to the Justice Minister doesn't mention an Alberta provincial police force. So the minister has said that, this is a thing that will be studied and recommendations will come back to the cabinet and that sort of stuff. So, it's out there a little bit, but it certainly does not seem like this is a priority for the provincial government at this time, which is interesting because, the Kenney government put quite a lot of resources into it. They had a whole study done that sort of looked at staffing and expenses and how it would be rolled out and all that sort of stuff, and quite a detailed plan, I thought, on how that could be accomplished. But it was never really that popular, right? People in Alberta didn't particularly want it. Even if they don't particularly like the RCMP, they were skeptics of another program coming in. The rural municipalities in particular didn't like it. There were some cost concerns there. They had existing relationships with folks in the RCMP. So it would have been, I think, a pretty hard sell for Albertans. And it does appear that this government is backing off on it at this point.
Yeah, there's the cost involved as well. Like we talked about, it'd be very costly converting it to the provincial police force. Speaking of cost, Daniel Smith, I guess, has been talking about potentially putting in a bid for the Commonwealth Games for 2030, you know, along with the mayors of both Calgary and Edmonton, but that could be also quite costly as well. Is it needed right now? Is this what our province really wants and needs?
Yeah, it's a good question, because especially in the context of this other discussion that's been happening about whether or not there should be referenda, I suppose, whenever international events are hosted by Alberta cities. It's sort of unclear, I think, whether or not this might go to a referendum. I don't get the sense that it could, but it's an interesting thing because, of course, those sort of events do allow for infrastructure to be built. The good example is the Canada Line in Vancouver during the 2010 Olympics. I believe Edmonton's Commonwealth Stadium was built for the Commonwealth Games in 1976, maybe is the number that comes to mind. So,
well,
in that
the speed
sense,
skating ovals in Calgary back in the 88 Winter Olympics as well, right?
Yeah, and you've got the Calgary Olympic Park, you've got Nikiska ski area. So there is stuff that can get done because of these events, but at the same time, how much money is going to be forked out by the provincial government, by municipal governments? Are Albertans going to want that? These things don't ever seem to be super, super popular. They do seem to be a bit of a hard sell. So I guess we'll have to see. It's an interesting file, and it's going to be even more interesting, I think, if it goes to a referendum.
Now, speaking of money, the Marda Loop Medical Clinic in Calgary decided against charging membership fees in exchange for faster access to a family doctor. Was it the threat of an audit by the province which kind of changed their minds? And how common of a practice is this really?
It does seem like the federal or the provincial government, I should say, sort of put a stop to it. There are some threats to withhold fee payments and things like that. The scheme itself is, it's relatively simple. It was a membership fee of, I think it was about $2,000 for an individual, up to $4,000 for a family each year. And it would basically get expedited access to the doctor. So, contrary to what some people have claimed, you did not have to pay to see a family doctor, really, not directly anyways. But it was super controversial, and actually another show of unity. Sort of Daniel Smith and Rachel Notley both more or less on the same page on this, although Rachel Notley certainly put a lot of effort into trying to make this out to be the UCP's fault. Now, as for the model itself, it's really common in the United States, where you get a whole basket of healthcare services for your membership fee. It's less common here, but it does exist. I think I looked into it last week, and there were a couple dozen clinics across the country, I think it was, that sort of did this model. But you can see. I'd be ticked if my family doctor sent me a letter saying I'd have to pay $2,000 to go see him. So it did sort of end that immediate controversy, but this is a strategy and a funding model, I guess, that exists elsewhere. And part of the reason people do it, is that running a physician clinic is, it's expensive. You get your payments from the province, but is that going to cover your staff, your rent, your utilities, yada, yada, yada. So it is a way to sort of, help keep the doors open, but clearly a bit of a negative public reaction to that.
Tyler, Premier Daniel Smith says she's skeptical that more insurance companies are going to be leaving Alberta because of the affordability measures capping insurance rates. And our rates are some of the highest in the country here.
Yeah, and so this sort of rate cap came in, and insurance companies were sort of looking at it, and one insurance company, we don't know which insurance company it is. There's confidentiality rules apparently that prevent the government from saying which company it is, but they had about 0.5% of the market share, so maybe 16,000 people's auto insurance. And so they pulled out, and the question is, obviously, are other companies going to follow suit? And as you said, Daniel Smith doesn't seem to think that's going to happen. I guess if we have among the highest insurance rates in the country, is a cap really cutting into profits all that much? So, it does seem like a hurry up and wait, we'll wait and see kind of thing about what's going to happen with the insurance sector. And the government, I believe, has also committed to sort of going back and looking at the cap and reanalyzing, where it's at. So we might see some changes there that would make it a little more palatable to the insurance industry. But let me tell you, my insurance went up, and I was on the phone in a hot second to argue for it to go down.
Yeah, so did mine as well. And I also want to talk to you about my electricity rates, which have also gone up quite a bit here. The government of Alberta has launched an office to combat human trafficking. $4 million is going to be invested to liaise with other service groups to connect victims of trafficking to community supports. Now, we're seeing around, 350 incidents of human trafficking each year across Canada. And Tyler, that's 350 too many.
Yeah, so the statistics the government put out, about 350 per year, from 2011 to 2021. If you add up all of them, it was about 3,500. So, a nationwide problem, it seems. And so this office is, as you said, just sort of going to liaise with other organizations, because there are some groups that do a lot of work in that, on that particular issue. And it will be a way to sort of connect them with social services and other community supports. So obviously not up and running yet, but another sort of summer policy proposal and expenditure from the province here.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the outdoor activities here in southern Alberta are part of the reason this area is a great place to live and also play in. And we've been chatting about the activities in the Crow's Nest Pass in recent weeks, and that's of course the mountainous region in southwestern Alberta on the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains. It's famous for outdoor recreation, and we did not want to forget about the motorized sports and opportunities that the region also has to offer. So to talk about what fuels their passion for exploring the public land use zones on 2 and 4 wheels, we're joined by Gary Clark of the Crow's Nest Quad Squad. Gary, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, so maybe give us a bit about, tell us a little bit about the origins of the Crow's Nest Pass Quad Squad. I got to make sure I say that right. It's kind of a tongue twister. So what's its mission or purpose? Why does it exist?
The Quad Squad is a nonprofit organization that was formed roughly 25 years ago, incorporated 25 years ago. And our mission is really to promote safe and responsible riding in the Crow's Nest Pass on motorized vehicles. Big component of that is education on how to ride responsibly and safely, and also to respect all the laws and the environmental impacts that we have on the environment. So that's basically what we do. We do a lot of trail maintenance. We have purchased some heavy duty equipment to be able to go into the trails and smooth the trails out, take away of the erosion factors, and to build what's called swales, which are basically a hump in the trail to divert the water off the trail safely into the forest floor and not go into the creeks. We also do a large number of bridge building and also bridge placement. We have, over the years of the history of the club, we've had over 70 bridges that we've placed over waterways.
Wow.
Last year, for example, we did a number of projects that we also put in a couple of bridges, and also we were commissioned by the provincial government to divert a new trail around some really badly eroded areas and let nature take its course. There's 2 particular trails that we did, both about almost 3/4 of a kilometer long. So that's the type of work that we do.
That's so interesting. So you're conservationists as well as recreationalists. And I think a lot of people might not realize that. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, of course, also about safety and responsibility. And we're definitely going to get into that as well. I think most people would think that this group is mostly about fuel and friendship, that's basically what powers the factors for you. But what do you think is the motivating factor for your members to join?
Well, there's a lot. There's the camaraderie. There's the, like you say, the friendship. A lot of people that join the club are fairly new riders and maybe new to the area and really want to be taken on even like a guided ride type thing to know where they can go and learn the rules and stuff like that. So we have 2 major events. We call them a season opener in the spring and a season closure in the fall, and it's a camp out type thing. And we have poker runs and prizes and stuff like that.
Sounds like fun.
Usually we get about 100 participants each time. So,
Wow.
And then we also do 5-day rides during the year.
Wow.
And usually we get about 40 people come out to some of the rides. So.
That's a long time to get out there and ride. 5 days. That's amazing. So do you personally have a favorite area or trail to ride?
Well, they're all favorites, I guess. But I think the Willoughby Trail in the Castle Parks has got to be one of my more favorite trails, and then also the Spoon Valley Run, which goes around leaving from the McGillivray staging area and then going around Crow's Nest Mountain down in a nice flat area, and then back down on the Atlas pipeline trail system, and then cutting across back to McGillivray.
Yeah, fantastic. It's such a beautiful area. And of course, you are joining us there from that little slice of heaven, Coleman, right? Which is right there in the Crow's Nest Pass. You're right in the heart of it. Okay, so Gary, in recent years, I know quadding in the Rockies and in the wilderness has gotten some bad press, and some people are against it, saying that it disrupts the migratory patterns of animals, or that it's maybe bad for the environment, or wrecks grasses, trees, bushes, what have you, right? And at one point, I think it was even banned temporarily. So what would your response be to all of that?
Well, that's one of the biggest challenges that we had. Certainly at one point, I think we had close to about 2,500 kilometers of trails. And through the designated trails system, that has now been reduced to roughly about 600 kilometers. So there's a big disruption in the trail system. Most of the trails we have now have bridges over most of the waters. We're still striving to be 100%, but it's going to take a long time. So that was one of our biggest challenges to overcome. Unfortunately, when you reduce the amount of trails, and more people are going on the trails, so that's adding more traffic and possibly more damage. So that was one of the reasons that we made a decision to purchase some heavy duty equipment to go out and fix the trails. So we have a very aggressive season to doing that. It's saving the money, or saving the government thousands of dollars a year, because we do it from our own fundraising and stuff like that. So, for example, last year we estimated in kind it saved the government about $66,000. So it's considerable, and we love doing it. It's we have a great crew to work with, and everybody has fun. And again, I think that's part of you're talking about the fuel to join the club. That's part of it as well. We have over 3,000 hours in volunteer hours throughout the year, and everybody has a lot of fun, not only working, but also going on the rides as well.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. On the flip side of all that bad press, you guys are doing those conservation efforts. You guys are involved in a lot of stuff there. It's really interesting. So are there any other challenges or obstacles that you've encountered while operating as a group?
Well, I think obviously the financial aspect of it. Everybody is struggling to raise money, and there were funds that were available which dried up. Fortunately, the Conservative government, along with the NDP, had started this as well in getting what's called a Trail Act in place, so that part of the registration from the monies that goes to the registration of the machines itself is now being divided up into a pot administered by the Alberta Off-Highway Vehicle Association. And from that, then we are able to draw funds from that to complete our project. So that's been a huge help to us, that we can concentrate more on maintaining the trails and getting bridges over waters and stuff like that, instead of having to do a lot of fundraising and in place of it. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so interesting. Are there any special requirements someone might need to operate one of these vehicles? You don't need any special license or certificate or anything like that, right?
No, you don't. It does have to be registered and insured, which is one of our club policies. Okay. You do have to wear helmets on a quad. Provincially, the law says that if you're in a side-by-side with a seatbelt on, then you do not need a helmet. But on any of the quad squad rides, that is mandatory, that you have to wear a helmet, even in the side-by-side. So safety first.
Yeah, speaking of safety, you know, every so often you hear about accidents or incidents involving an off-road vehicle. I know growing up, we had three-wheel ATVs out at our cabin, and almost every one of us kids had some sort of accident with it. Thankfully, nothing more than just broken bones. But I believe those three-wheelers are now banned. But do you ensure your members practice any other type of safety measures other than helmets? Like, how does the group prioritize safety and responsibility for quad riding?
Well, again, with the helmet use, and you're right, three-wheelers have been banned, and there was a reason for it, and I rode them and know why they're banned. But Yeah, they mostly when we go in a group, then we have a meeting beforehand. We have to be very conscious that we're in a wildlife corridor. The bears are out. We do carry bear bangers, and we do have emergency satellite equipment with us for any type of emergency. We also carry radios that we can communicate back and forth between ourselves, and then also, if required, we can also reach the search and rescue channels and the other government channels. So we want to tell people to ride slowly. It's not a race. You're out there to enjoy the backcountry, and also to respect people when we come upon hikers, to slow down. You don't need to be roaring by them, and slow down. And same as the mountain bike people and the equestrians. So it's that backcountry is for everybody. It's not just for us. It's for everybody. So
Yeah, I haven't gone in the backcountry, but I would imagine it's a beautiful way to see the mountains and the countryside.
yeah, it is. I mean, you go right up Willoughby Ridge, for example, and that's probably why I like it the best, is because you're actually on top of a ridge. So on your right, you see a downhill view. On your left, you see a downhill view.
Oh, wow. That's
It's
incredible.
absolutely beautiful.
No kidding. Okay, so in your mind, how has the Crow's Nest Pass Quad Squad positively impacted the local community?
Well, there was a study done in 2014 by a lady from the University of Alberta that did a study as part of her master's degree, and she estimated that through online surveys and also interviews of over 600 people, that the annual income to the Crow's Nest Pass was $7.1 million spent on anything from food, fuel, travel, etc. And $4.4 million of that was actually spent locally in the Crow's Nest Pass. So that's a considerable amount of money. We also have an annual budget of roughly about $100,000 that all of that money is spent either locally, or if we can't get it locally here, then certainly in Lethbridge has helped us out as far as equipment and stuff like that as well. So. And also, I think the volunteerism that we do, from anything from fundraising for like doing bartending for weddings, or the curling club, our annual raffle off quad or side by side actually brings in an awful lot of money for us for our purposes, and just the volunteering of getting out, like Stewardship Day, the first weekend in June, doing projects to clean up areas, or also to do the maintenance on trails itself. I think is a very positive aspect for the Crow's Nest Pass, and it keeps people coming back as well.
That's so interesting. It sounds like you're involved in all kinds of activities and events. And what are maybe the future goals or plans that the group is currently working towards?
We're going to carry on as we do now. We work very closely with the provincial government, in particular the local forestry office, and higher ups in environment and parks as well. They've been a very solid base for us. We rely on them on advice on how to do a certain trail or maintain the trails. They come out and make sure that we're doing it correctly and how they want it done and stuff. So we have a really good relationship to it. We're very lucky down here that we do. And so we're going to continue going on with building more bridges and putting more bridges in place where it's required. We understand the science behind how the going through waters impacts the fish habitat and things like that. So
yeah, I was going to ask you actually why build a bridge? I know these things can cut right through the water depending how deep it is.
Yeah, and it's fun to go through the water, but that's part of the thing. It's actually illegal to go through the water.
Okay.
So that's why we build the bridges, and it basically, if when you're going through the water, you're stirring up the silt, which causes the deeper pools to fill up, and the water slows down. The fish can't have a great habitat to live in, covers up the food. There's all kinds of reasons, but
makes sense once you start thinking about it. It definitely makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe like we're almost out of time here, but really quickly, what advice would you give to individuals or families who might be interested in ATV quad riding?
I would definitely join a club such as ours. There are other clubs around the province as well if you're not from this area, but certainly you can look us up on our website at quadsquad.ca and also our Facebook page as well. The benefits of joining the club are that you get some reductions from certain businesses in town as well. And also you get the emails and their messages on safety and upcoming events and stuff like that. So,
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, is there a benefit to joining a club like this other than just going out on your own?
well, I think there is. We always urge people to at least go with another couple or so, because if you do break down way out in the middle of the trail, it's a long walk back, and
Yes.
uh,
Could be
yeah, so
dangerous.
that's the other advantage of going on our rides. Of course, if someone breaks down or is having trouble or is afraid to go over a certain area, then you have all kinds of help there to
Yeah.
help
You need that
people.
buddy system, I guess. It can be
Exactly.
dangerous out there in the wilderness, that's for
Exactly.
sure. All right. Well, Gary Clark of the Crow's Nest Quad Squad, thanks so much for joining us today from Coleman, Alberta. A little slice of heaven there in the Crow's Nest Pass.
Absolutely. Come on out. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.